Well, I'm back from the hospital with RSV and pneumonia and endocarditis and some other disease. I forget what the hell it is, um, where the rib cage and ribs are sore because of all the coughing, etc. So after a week or so on antibiotics and prednisone and all this kind of stuff, I feel like televising. But I didn't feel like shaving today, so screw it. Um, we've been going through a few health problems for the last month or so, and I went through a month of prednisone treatment. I went through a bunch of heart tests. I went through lung tests. Then I went down to the Caribbean to go down to zero sea level, where I could breathe without oxygen, and enjoyed it down there, and came back and caught this RSV. So anyway, I'm restructuring some of my priorities on things I'm working on. First off, I'm consulting with a group from the Eastern Seaboard about artificial intelligence regarding getting a library for the MK Ultra and Sandoz Laboratory and CIA MK Ultra files regarding hallucinogenics. I think they're becoming legalized in most states now, or at least there's a progress going on to do so. And it doesn't seem to me that all the beneficial value of these drugs and all the value of the experiment that we paid for as U.S. citizens should be classified because it might embarrass some bureaucrat or some scientist or whatever, particularly when they were playing footsies with the Nazis. So I say, screw them. Give us that data and let us sort through it. Let the FDA sort through it if you don't trust us, ignorant dinosaurs. But turn loose of it. Don't just protect the guys' asses because they wanted to play footsies with the Nazis. Give us the material. Let us evaluate it. Let us be grown-up people. Secondly, we want to get into the UFO studies a little bit to see what is propaganda and what isn't. I think there's a lot of it is propaganda. Thirdly, my memoirs are being short-sighted here because of all the other projects I got to do. And next, I am working on a project with a couple of friends regarding the French Connection case, Mafia, CIA, etc., going back to the 50s and 60s. And I'll be bringing you up to date on that. But today I want to talk about anger management, computer theft, how they're ripping us off, and a few other things. I want to go through experiences I had in the hospital and tell you my interpretation. So it started out early in the morning. I really couldn't get up. I couldn't get around. I had no muscular control. Finally, my wife called the ambulance, rascally called the paramedics. They evaluated me and decided to take me to the hospital. Now, I'm a patient at a place called Good Samaritan, which is in Lafayette. That's my insurance plan. It used to be I'd go to the closest hospital, but now we're in a little different era. So I was in the hospital, or in the ambulance. They drove me toward the hospital, and the hospital stated they didn't have room. Well, then they wanted to drive me 40 miles away to Denver, which I objected to, and my wife objected to, because there is a hospital outside of our plan, 5 blocks from the house. So after getting halfway to Lafayette, Colorado, which is 10, 15 miles away, they turned around and came back to Boulder and admitted me to the emergency room of the Boulder Community Hospital. I go in there. I hadn't eaten breakfast. I hadn't even had coffee. I hadn't anything. I was sick. I was run down, etc. And I was inquiring about the time and how long it would take and things like that. And at that time, they said they were pretty sure they were going to have to admit me. So I said, well, can I get breakfast or something? And they said, yeah, you can get breakfast. 10 o'clock in the morning. So I sit around in the uncomfortable emergency room doing this, that, and the other, getting jabbed, poked, prodded, insulted, embarrassed because of as an old man, you don't really function the way you used to as a kid. But going through all of that, they decided they would admit me to the hospital. Now, around noon, I ordered breakfast or lunch or something, and I waited around and waited around and waited around. Finally, they sent me up to a room about 3:30 or 4. And I asked where my food was. They said it was probably on their way. So about 5:30, they came in with this omelet that had been made about 10:30 in the morning. And they couldn't understand why I didn't want to eat it because it was cold. Well, after a few good words about that, they finally let me order dinner. Well, then they have this protocol questionnaire of this, that, or the other. And I had fallen, as you recall, in California a year and a half ago. And I've been using a rollator and cane ever since. And they asked me if I had fallen recently, and I didn't know what recently meant. I didn't know what fallen meant. I'd use the rollator to catch myself and never really had fallen down, but I said yes, I had a few stumbles. So they put me on this bed. And every time I moved, the alarm would go off. They also had me in quarantine because I had RSV. So to go into the room, they had to suit up with separate gowns, etc., every time they came in and went out. So I would shift on the bed, they'd come in and they'd say, don't move. It's inconvenient. Well, I argued about having the sensor because I didn't fall. It was overkill. And instead of discussing it with me, they managed me like you do in anger management classes. I'm just the irascible 80-year-old man that they could give a fuck about less. Well, after a few times of this, I pushed the nurse button. It took a wild response. In the meeting time, I had come down with explosive diarrhea. And while they were getting to the room, I created what you might call a shitstorm with at least 1.5 quarts of fecal material on the floor, because they took away my walker because they didn't want me walking without somebody in the room. They're afraid of my falling. And finally, they compromised by turning off the alarm if I promised not to go to the walker. Well, when they hesitated getting into the room, of course they didn't get in time. And here they walk into a pile of shit near the toilet. Well, I felt really embarrassed. You can't believe how embarrassed a guy at my age feels when you're in a facility and they got to come in and clean up your mess after you, particularly that kind of mess. I feel sorry for that, for the nurse's aide and everything else, and vowed that I would try my damnedest not to let that happen again. So I explained, or tried to explain, why this happened in the first place and why I thought I should be trusted with the walker, so at least I wouldn't have to embarrass myself and go through the great humiliation of making somebody clean up my mess after me. Well, that goes on for a while, and we argue back and forth. And the thing that bothers me more than anything is they tried the psychological anger management technique and all of this other stuff. And when I first got to the room, I was a little bit disappointed and a little bit disgruntled that I hadn't had my breakfast. Now, I'm diabetic, and when I miss a meal, I get real angry, or at least get stressed. Secondly, I'd been on cortisone for 60 days. I was on 50 milliliters, whatever the hell that is. It's a large doses. And cortisone makes you uneasy and nervous and gets a person upset too. So they come in, and finally I get my dinner, and then a little while later we negotiate a little more, and I finally get them to take the restrictive alarm pad off so I can at least get up and down in the bed and take a leak. Because every time I get up to use the urinal, which is bedside, it sets off the alarm, which causes an avalanche of flurry. Well, the next day, things go fairly well. We get some accommodations made. And I do some work with my friend Ravi, go through some analysis of things. And I'm still trying to work on why all of these cops went up to Idaho Springs and killed this guy that was mentally broken down or called for help because he wouldn't get out of the car. And reviewing all the notes I had on cop killings and things like that in the last few years. And what I concluded was a lot of these people, the cops, are impatient. The mother calls because she can't control her kid. The cop comes out and the cop is trained to do certain things. And when the kid doesn't obey, finally loses patience and kills him. The thing up in the mountains, the cop told the guy, put the knife down. Put the knife down. His training was you take control of the situation. So here I am in the hospital. I'm stressed. I've got RSV. I've got pneumonia. I've got all kinds of wires coming out of me and IVs coming out. And I'm not in the best of spirits. And they tell me they're going to give me this test or that test and things like this. So I get out of the test and my lunch isn't there. I've just had a round of tests. I'm anxious. I had to go under anesthetic, and one of my good friends didn't recover from anesthetic when he was my age. And the first fear I have is losing my mind. And I couldn't remember a few things. And I thought, oh, fuck, I've had a stroke. So I call the nurse in. I say, I feel like I've had a stroke. I can't remember, etc. In the meantime, I had ordered lunch. And my wife was in the room. The lunch tray came down and they parked it in the hallway. And the lunch runner said he had to check with the nurses. My wife left and went off to her next appointment. When she was walking to the next appointment, I called her when she was 12 blocks away and told her I hadn't had my lunch. What the hell was the delay? And she didn't know because they said they'd bring it right in. And it's terrible when your lunch gets cold and you're waiting for it, particularly after procedures, things like that. You're nervous, distraught, etc. So I called to the front desk and I say in a rather loud voice, where the hell's my lunch?
I fucking love that.
And the front desk said, well, I will ask your nurse in a more civil tone. Well, I don't care how civil it was. I could give a shit less. I want to know where my lunch was. And secondly, I really resented some young kid at the front desk correcting my grammar and playing thought police or speech police when I'm hungry as hell and under all these drugs and nervous and just come out of a surgical procedure. And she's going to say, I'm going to ask, I'm not polite. Well, my answer to that is fuck her.
You missed that part.
So the next thing happens is they get in there and I want to know where my lunch is. I want to know this, and I want to know that. And instead of sending in the lunch, they send in a nurse. And here's where the management thing comes in. They come in and they're not going to do anything until I settle down. They don't ask me, what do I want, what's wrong, etc. I said, I want my lunch. I said that earlier. But rather than getting my lunch or saying, how can I help you, or anything else, they are concerned about management. So the next thing I know, it escalates where they've got the fucking security guards in behind her. Now, the nurse then is not going to do anything until I settle down. Well, I'm not going to settle down until I got my goddamn lunch. And now the security guards is there. And one of the things you don't do from an old 60s protester who's had his head banged in by cops and guards is call a security guards, particularly when they're famous for killing more people than they save. I know this because of age. These kids don't. So the security guards are here looking real official, and they're not saying anything. So I tell him, I said, arrest my ass, get me out of here. I don't care. Don't manage me. I don't want to be managed. Why? It occurred to me, why the hell can't somebody just say, what do you want? But they are trained not to do anything until they take control. So until this nurse gets control of the situation, I can go to hell as far as she's concerned. Now I'm thinking back to the mountains. This kid is in the car. He's nervous. He's upset. He's maybe semi-psychotic. I don't know. And the cops arrive there and they say, get out of the car. Well, he's scared to get out of the car. He tells them he's scared to get out of the car. They said, do you have a weapon? Yeah, I have a rock knife here. Well, put down the weapon. Well, their training says you got to control the situation. Instead of saying, how the hell can I help you? What can I do for you? Calling a tow truck to get him unstuck, they want to manage the situation. That is bad training. And I think we ought to hire all these goddamn trainers that talk about anger management and get rid of them, because retail management techniques would suffice in that station. I worked as a clerk in Safeway. I delivered papers. If a customer on my route said, where's my goddamn paper, I wouldn't call in social workers and security guard to discuss it. Now, the answer you get on a lot of these people when you complain is, I'm sorry. The computer made an error. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, I don't give a damn if you're sorry or not. I'm hungry. So the next thing that happens with the menu is I get the procedure. Now, I'm on no diet restriction for the ASR, although I do restrict because of my diabetes. Now the heart doctor comes in and the computer says, now I'm on a heart diet. So I want to order lunch, and I can't order lunch because the computer says I'm on a heart diet. Well, I should care less what the computer says. So I talked to the dietitian, I talked to the food services people. I talked to the nurses, and they said they're going to take me off the dietetic diet so I can have some real food. Well, I called there and they said I'm still on it. They call again and I'm still on it. And they can't make the change. Now let's go back to the grocery store. A customer comes in and says, this item, this peanut butter, is mismarked. I say, I'm sorry. And I turn my back on the customer and walk toward the back again. Now, what the hell is the customer going to do? What is the customer's remedy? Well, the peanut butter's mismarked. She can go up to the cash register. He can go up to the cash register, pay the mismarking, and eat it. Or else. There is no recourse when the clerk walks away. Now, I've been battling for over an hour whether or not I could have a certain diet. And they would not address the issue. They didn't say, how can we fix this? How can we help? Whatever. They said, a fucking machine says you got this diet. This is all we can give you to eat. Lump it or leave it. Well, my view is if the machine says that, somebody ought to be responsible for the machine. And here's my view. I'm on medication. I'm upset. I'm sick. I've had procedure, and they're worried about what machines, some machine says I can have for lunch. Why can't we have some person in there that intercedes? But no, we got to have the goddamn machines. And the machines put out the algorithm or whatever, and the algorithm says go hungry. Well, then breakfast comes. And we get down to everything, but I want my omelet, cereal, and 2 pieces of toast. I don't know how many carbs are in a piece of toast. But the computer wouldn't let me have a second piece of toast. The computer locked out after 1 piece of toast unless I gave something else up and traded. Now, what the hell kind of rational decision is that? What the hell kind of society are we doing when nobody will reprogram a goddamn machine to make a decent decision and everybody else has to suffer? I say bullshit. I say it's time we stand up to this. I say it's time we ask for legislation. If a machine's going to make a decision and the machine is wrong, then whoever programs the machine or is responsible or profits from the machine ought to pay. So, if you're in my law office and I make a mistake on your will, I pay. I have malpractice insurance. My insurance company pays, or I pay out of my pocket, whatever. I'm in a hospital and a computer makes a mistake. What was the wrong medicine? Should the computer error then be excused? Should some trained person, trained in nursing, be excused because they did the management thing? Because some dumbass said, take control of the situation before you solve it. It seemed to me common sense would say, Mr. Blewett, how can I help you? How can we resolve this? What seems to be the problem? But when everybody says, I'm sorry, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it, what the hell is it worth? So my view is if you can't train your personnel, if you can't train your machine, if you can't correct your personnel, if you can't correct your machine, then abolish them or pay the consequences. Now you let's take a look at the railroad strike. What's going on with railroad strikes? They won't give workers sick days. Well, who the hell doesn't have sick days this time, day and age? But they won't do it because it screws up the management board and all this kind of stuff because they have to operate. They can go out and hire more employees. When I got bogged down in my work, I hired temporary employees. Why can't the railroads do the same? Why are they so exempt? Why do they get to not pay sick pay? Why can they lay off all these employees like the firemen and the conductors and be more efficient with 100-mile-long trains so they can increase their profits and buy back their stock, and everybody else just has to suffer? Well, that's bullshit. If they can't staff their people, then take the hit. If you can't give paid vacations, take the hit. If you can't give sick leave, take the hit. Or pay the consequences. So what's happened is multinational corporations are avoiding liability, they're avoiding responsibility, and they're laying it off on computer errors and all this other kind of bullshit. And this is wrong. And then we got all kinds of lobbyists saying, well, the computers are wonderful, artificial intelligence is great, and all this kind of shit. And you go cops out murdering people. You have cops go out and murder people. And the cops say, well, the computer told me to do it. Or my training told me to do it. Or I feared for my life. Well, I had a person hold a knife at my carotid artery, not my throat, the carotid artery, who was the head of the American Nazi Party in San Quentin prison. He held a knife at my throat for 20 minutes while I talked him down. And if I'd have talked him down and done all this other bullshit, I'd be dead by now. But I resolved, and I talked logic to him. And he thought I'd done something. And I said, well, look at it this way. I'm the only one ever speaking on your behalf. You can slide the knife, and nobody's going to be talking for you. Why don't you hold off and see if I'm right or somebody else is right? You can always cut my throat tomorrow. And that seemed to make sense to him, so I'm alive today. So when the police go up to the mountains, they say, how can we help? The prime directive, we have somebody here in distress. How do we help them? Not how do we manage the situation? How do we take control? How do we do this, that, or the other? How do you help? What are you there for? What is your purpose? The purpose is he called for help. The purpose is he was afraid to get out of his car. The purpose was that he was afraid and he thought cops would alleviate the fear. And instead, they exacerbated it. Well, I say fire all the cop trainers. Hold them liable. And if they do the wrong training, then make them insure themselves. Make trainers insure themselves that they get proper training, or else pay the consequences. Same way with dog handlers. They cheat. They with the drug dogs. Yeah, that's bullshit too. Then let's hold them liable for false arrest. The dog goes off on something and there's nothing there, then let them pay the subject $25,000 to $100,000 for false arrest or false charge. Nobody can be more embarrassed than a lot of women with dogs sniffing around their skirts and things like that. I don't particularly like dogs either. I don't like them sniffing. So if you're going to subject me to a dog sniff, then pay me if you embarrass me. The record of idiocy along this line is the cop that parked her car on a railroad track and stuck a suspect in it so that the train could run the car over. This is the type of product we're doing. This is the type of product we're making with this so-called artificial intelligence, machine decision making, and things like that. And I think we ought to abolish all the machine decision making until we figure out how to give brain transplants to the people that are supposed to serve us. And until we can do that, no more machine decision making. That's all for your dangerous dinosaur today. Have a good roar.
Well, it's very funny to begin with, but then you divert it and ramble too much.
Well, I always